Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I am joined by my bombardier. I don't even know about co-pilot, man. I feel totally comfortable with you just manning the guns on the plane. I'll take the wheel, and we'll get the job done. A1, Mr. Brian E. Roach. Brian, what's going on, my friend?
I like that. I get to blow stuff up. I'm good with that analogy. It makes me happy, and I don't have to be responsible when we crash.
Unless you're the reason we get hit and the plane starts going down, which, many times you are the reason for this show taking a nosedive. So, but I'm equally responsible, I guess, too. I love it. I love puns. I love metaphors. I love them all. And I don't even know if any of those were the above. Maybe a haiku. We'll throw one of those in there. We've got some Steelers news that we will and will not cover.
Yes.
And a main topic of the day, since everyone is playing their Madden Fantasy GM caps out there in the social media / web world. But before that, I got to say, man, it's pretty unprecedented for head coach Mike Tomlin to not only go on TV for an interview, but to do so addressing very specific hot button topics, Antonio Brown and Mason Rudolph. And I'm not going to get into he said, she said, if the NFL, who would have audio, who wouldn't have audio. My only main thought on this is one, that's unprecedented for Mike Tomlin to come out and, defend his guy. And in the way he did it, also taking a shot at ESPN for not being forthcoming, the very clickbait kind of bullcrap stuff that we talk about a lot here when we're talking about social media and some bloggers and other things. And, I don't mean to put us above bloggers, but I tend to hold us in a little bit higher of professionalism and integrity than some folks will just say or do anything to get you to have a view, a listen, a click, or whatever to their platform. And ESPN has kind of gone lowbrow with some of their stuff like that too. Mike Tomlin, calling the shots there, man, sticking up for Mason Rudolph. And I mean, I think it just boils down to is either these guys are completely ignorant of hearing or anything transpiring, or they firmly believe that this did not occur. And I think it's also very telling that you have, not to get into too much politics or race or anything like that, this is an African-American head coach sticking up for a Caucasian quarterback in this situation. I understand it's his player, but we've said this before. Marquise Pouncey probably doesn't get involved. Anybody who's seen the Aaron Hernandez thing on Netflix, Marquise Pouncey was part of that Florida team, which was, running amok. I understand they had Tim Tebow there too, and he was, the perfect little angel. But there's some guys that team deserves its own 30 for 30. Many people have mentioned that for a while. We know about the Pouncey brothers. Marquise Pouncey is a locker room enforcer. There's not anything he's going to tolerate if he catches wind of that. I understand some people are like, well, he's just going to beat up somebody because he's protecting his own quarterback. But you got cameras all over that catch not Myles Garrett, but Mason Rudolph mouth the word, it rhymes with which and begins with a B. I'm not going to repeat it since we are a PG show. But you know what I mean? I talk about this all the time with cameras and microphones and all these other things when it comes to the NFL. And in today's, social justice reform world, politically correct world, cancel culture, any of the words you want to throw out there, this just isn't something where I think the NFL buries a story if it happens. You know what I mean? They just can't. They can't get away with that. And with smartphones and everything else out there, I don't know. I just think it's kind of I'm not going to throw any accusations either way. I think it's an ugly story, and I think it's very unprecedented and very telling that Mike Tomlin goes on national television not only to stick up for his guy, but to also throw some of the media people under the bus for the way they've, dumped gasoline back on this fire.
Yeah, look, as you said, it's unprecedented that Tomlin would go out there and not only call out the network itself that did this interview, but also, defend Mason Rudolph. You have to believe at this point that there is absolutely no corroborating evidence that would let you think that that this could have happened. And there's a whole bunch of other things to take into account. We're not talking about a star player. We're not talking about a guy who is front line, so to speak. This is a backup quarterback that these guys are heavily defending. And if you're going to go to that extreme to protect a backup quarterback, you got to feel pretty comfortable that these guys are absolutely certain that it didn't happen. What I will say is there's no telling what Myles Garrett heard. Because anybody who's ever been on a football field knows that you hear things, right?
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter what in actuality was said or not said, the way something echoes through the helmet, the way something just does, just comes into your ear. He could have very well thought he heard something. He would be wrong. So I'm not going to call him out and say he's a flat out liar because it's perception. If he believes that's what he heard, then that's what he believes. However, that being said, and you and you've discussed it.
Yeah.
The main point, you've discussed this in the back studios, and I agree with what you said, is it's almost inconceivable, and I love that word, inconceivable. And anybody in the comments who gets what my reference is from, for that, I will give you a happy smile and a shout out on the next episode. But be that as it may, it's inconceivable that Myles Garrett would calm down if that in fact is what set him off. You're talking about a trigger issue. You're talking about a whole lot of sensitivity and things that just don't go away, right? It's not, you don't calm down and just go away. And it would have been broadcast all over everything because the declarations would have been coming out. You can't call me, blah, blah, blah. And the fact that nothing was said, even though there's a Browns guy who said, oh yeah, he said it after the game. I don't buy it. There's nobody that heard it. There's nothing else.
It was like a week later after the discipline came out, and all of a sudden this kind of became like his crutch or his justification for what happened on the field. I further think that if it really was, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on how offended you get over something. If it's me in that situation in Garrett's shoes, I'm probably restrained by actual armed guard security and removed from the field if I were, felt that, upset over it, not just, smacking somebody with a helmet or whatever. But, if you really want to hear all of our thoughts on this, go back in the archives from, back when it happened. And, if you feel that Mason was an instigator or Garrett was the instigator or anything else like that, just go back. We hammered out probably 45 minutes discussing it from every angle. There's still photos that are, shown in such a light or presented in such a way that are wrong. There was never anyone kicked in the nuts or anything like that, and things of that nature. Glove getting stuck in his pads, I believe, right underneath the face mask. So people are going to say grasping at the helmet and things of that nature that become narrative but aren't necessarily fact in this matter. So you could go back and see. I may even have an article that was up on SteelCityUnderground.com as well. But I mean, we hammered that. I don't want to spend a whole entire episode on that once again, and to be completely honest, keep it clean in the comments because this isn't, the Steelers fans, they don't really want, most of them don't want this to be a narrative and anything that they really want to, it's uncomfortable to talk about, obviously, because if it did happen, it would be, bad, to say the least.
Yeah.
Very damaging. And that's the reason why Tomlin went on national media to protect his guy, because he said the only thing he was guilty of was getting fined for being beat up, which I thought that was great. I snorted with a laugh when I heard that. So the other thing Tomlin talked about too was, we just did this on an episode, so we can close the door on it if anyone's catching up on past episodes and they're just like, well, gee, maybe Antonio Brown could be an option. Well, Mike Tomlin says that once a Steeler, always a Steeler, and they're interested in his growth as a man, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested in signing him to the team. So, that's we can close the door on that one too, and that's pretty good on that part. I think
just to give the shout out, Dennis, you already closed that door, Dennis Sheridan. We know, we understand, we feel you.
Now, man, I'll tell you what. This poison is even leaked into the back rooms at Steel City Underground. Just free agency is around the corner here. How far are we out? We about a month out? I don't even know. You know what? I'm going to have to look this up now. I thought I knew, and now I don't remember. But, we need to start talking about this, because there's all kinds of stuff that's just matriculating all over the web about hey, if I've used that properly, I'm not even sure. We're a week away from when we're on February 25th for the first day for teams to designate a franchise or transition tag players. Okay, so you're going to start tagging people March 10th. So about 3 weeks or so is going to be the deadline for the franchise and transition tag for players. And I believe we get to free agency. Let's see. This period begins March 16th. So about a month away is that soft contact area before everything begins. I believe on March 18th is when all 4 o'clock, all the contracts begin to expire, and the 2020 league year free agency period officially begins. 4 o'clock, that's Eastern time zone, New York time, as the league says, on March 18th. So there's still, literally 30 days or whatever. I know there's a leap year this year. Is it 31 days? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But a month. We're a month away, right? And there's all kinds of stuff I'm seeing all over the interwebs about, players the Steelers need to release, positions and players the Steelers need to go after. We've talked about it here, Greg Olsen, Phillip Rivers. I mean, I'm seeing just some of the most inane ideas here. For anyone who's wise, we have pretty much just slammed it shut. There's another door, and padlocked it, extra padlocked it with the Steelers' $1.5 million in cap space, which isn't even enough maybe to sign some of the rookies they could draft. So they're going to have to do some finagling of the cap. They're going to need some cap magic, and there's some definite priorities, and that's what we're going to talk about today is the priorities, because the Steelers are never a team that's very active in free agency to begin with. Last year was really a misnomer. So you get to this year where they have no money, and I think everybody wants to fire everybody, which I still can't comprehend. So there was somebody that was like, for as bad as they were last year, they should just get rid of everybody and start over. And it's like, well, I mean, who are they getting rid of? Who's responsible for the bad seasons? The guys, Kareth White, that wasn't on a team. He was on a practice squad. Deion Kane that was on a practice squad. Duck Hodges that was an undrafted rookie quarterback. I mean, come on. I mean, that is wiping the slate clean. That's what they had last year. So you're not going to get rid of I don't think you get rid of Ben. And people want to get rid of Ben. We spent a whole episode on that. I'm not going to dig into drafting or signing a quarterback. Go back and listen to that. Basically, they're stuck with Ben because they're paying Ben a lot of money. Why are they paying Ben a lot of money? Because he threw for practically the most yards he ever has in a season the previous year when he was healthy and was rewarded, and rightfully so. Because then if you don't do that and he's a free agent this year, what's the talk right now? You know what I mean? Maybe some people are just like, oh, move on, this and that. Maybe it's more valid too. But since you owe the guy $30-some million and are taking a huge cap hit, there is nothing you could really do. And we already mentioned and if you move on, you're getting like Ryan Fitzpatrick or Brian Hoyer, bargain basement veteran quarterback to compete as your starter. That's not where you want to go. The XFL guys aren't where you're going to go, and there are like barely any draft picks where you're going to want to waste one on a quarterback. There are other priorities that the Steelers need to focus on, and we're going to be doing that here in just a few moments.
Absolutely, and I do want to say, because there's been so much talk about how the offseason needs of the Steelers are all about the quarterback. And I just want to tell you that the sites that are feeding into that, they're pandering to your desires, the Steelers Nation.
Yeah.
They're pandering to you because it's not the case. It simply isn't the case. It's not even a feasible alternative for the Steelers to try and seek out, as you were saying, another quarterback. They've got the guys that they're going to have, and you just have to buckle up and accept the fact that if Ben isn't going to come back healthy, that it's going to be a rocky road. Because they don't have the money to go out and sign anybody that you want to sign. There's Marcus Mariotas and the Phillip Rivers and all these things that people keep talking about.
You know what?
It's just crazy. Can't do it.
I never even brought up Marcus Mariota. You want to know why? Because he's a former first-round pick, top pick overall?
Yeah.
That lost his job to Ryan Tannehill. Close the book on that. I'm not paying this guy much of anything to come in and, you're not going to get Phillip Rivers to come in and get Phillip Rivers. He'll be a backup for Ben. So either you think Ben's going to be good enough to still start, or you're still a little leery, but you need somebody that's good enough to start that you're hoping is like, I'll go to Pittsburgh. I'll move to Pittsburgh and just not start. That doesn't work that way.
That's not going to work. And the other thing is, I don't think this has been talked about enough. But the hiring of Matt Canada as a quarterback coach, and I know we've talked about it, but you got to understand that it's more than just as a quarterback's coach. He has ideas that people have been complaining about with the Steelers offense for years. Ideas of motion, the idea of integrating a lot more motion into their offense can come from that hire. You want to talk about what their priorities were and what their needs were. I think the hiring of Matt Canada was a big step in addressing what their potential changes and shifts and things that they want to do moving forward with this offense are. That's the way you start. You get a guy who understands motion the way that Matt Canada understands motion, and you bring him in here to give some life to what was certainly a lifeless offense last year. And on top of that, as you may have noticed, and as you actually informed me, because I was busy doing other things and hadn't paid attention and wasn't aware,
which is surprising. You're almost the first to know on these things.
Yeah, and I was all tied up, so I didn't know that they'd hired Ike Hilliard as their wide receivers coach. Again, those are the kind of pressing needs that you have, addressing those coaching needs. We've talked about this in multiple ways. This is not a team, provided that Ben comes back healthy, with a lot of needs. But you want to go the area, and the more that time drifts on, the more I am convinced this is going to be a focus in the draft. An area of need is the line. That's where I look.
Well, that's not the top we're going to get to there and how we came to that conclusion, Brian. But the top priority this offseason, before you even get to the draft, is what? Re-sign Bud Dupree or tag him, right?
Oh, yeah, that's number one. There's no question about that.
I mean, in order to get there, it was pretty funny, though. Like, I got to pull this up. It was Bob Labriola. Got to give this credit. What was it? Was it today's Asked and Answered or yesterday's?
Labs is the man. I saw your statement about how you love him. I've loved him longer. He's my man.
He's talking about re-signing Bud Dupree. That's obviously the big one, and he's talking about how I'll just read it. It says, "First, I'm eager for the Steelers to retain Bud Dupree. That could come either with a long-term contract, which would be easier on the salary cap in 2020, or via the franchise tag, which would be tantamount to a one-year deal at a high salary cap charge in 2020. Dupree just celebrated his 27th birthday, and he has flourished since being moved from the left side to the right side of the defense. You're assuming that Dupree somehow was not putting – this was the answer to a question because somebody was calling him a one-year wonder and playing for a contract, basically, right? So he's saying – he's answering this person's question. You're assuming that Dupree somehow was not putting forth maximum effort during the first 4 years of his NFL career, only did so in 2019 in order to cash out in free agency. My view is that Dupree had to adjust from being a de facto defensive end at the University of Kentucky to the way the Steelers play their 3-4 outside linebackers, and he also had to deal with some injuries. Don't forget, man, I mean, he was on injured reserve to start the one season, missed like 10 games, and then barely played. Like he was eased back in. I remember, what was it, a Thursday night game with the Colts or something? And, he only played like 2-3 snaps. So there's a lot of credence to this. The other thing was, when he was a rookie, they still had an outside linebacker rotation. He's playing like half the game. He's not playing full time like James Harrison and Lamar Woodley were, okay? So he had to deal with some injuries that further slowed his development. What are the Steelers' options if they don't retain Dupree? Even if they had a first-round pick and drafted a potential replacement with that selection, they'd be at the same place with their new rookie that they were in with Dupree 5 years ago. Bingo, ding, ding, ding. Labs he nails it right there. And finally, my eagerness to retain Dupree really is meaningless, especially in light of Steelers president Art Rooney II, general manager Kevin Colbert, and coach Mike Tomlin, all publicly voicing the opinion that keeping Dupree is a, quote, he put quotations around this, top priority. This has to be the top priority even on our show. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, and you know what? There's people out there that are like, this is absolutely crazy. I saw one yesterday that was like the Steelers' perfect offseason, and it was talking about releasing Vance McDonald, Mark Barron, Anthony Chickillo, maybe even Ramon Foster, but I think it was just those three. And somehow this amounted to $25 or $26 million in free cap space. No, it does not. For 2020, it would amount to like 14 something, maybe 15 in pocket change. And then you got to use some of that money, which would probably be barely enough. I don't even know that covers the franchise tag for if they tagged Dupree, by the way. I hadn't actually looked up that figure. I don't know if we have the full figures just yet. But you got to use some of that money in order to replace Vance McDonald, because some people are like, oh, yeah, well, you could just put Nick Vannett in there. No, he's not under contract. He's a free agent. Can't do that.
Yeah.
You're going to need another linebacker. Okay, you could play Vince Williams in that spot. He's making a decent chunk of change these next two upcoming seasons. Somebody's like, why did they spend all this money on Vince Williams? Well, back in 2018, in August, guess what was going on? We were still dealing with Ryan Shazier and how tragic that injury and recovery was. They were trying to find somebody to sign and put in there in his place, which was John Bostic. So with Vince Williams only left with 1 year on his contract, what do you do there? You secure the future by locking this guy up so you don't have to replace two inside linebackers. So the people that are upset about whatever Vince Williams is getting paid, which I believe he's earned what he's making, like $7 million or something like that, which is still middle of the pack. It's just like Vance McDonald, which we said with the tight ends, and we've repeated on this show many times. It's like in the middle of the road, when you're looking at other NFL starters. It's like eventually you got to pay some people. It's going to be a mix of, you're going to have some cheaper guys that are going to get in there, whether they be rookies. And you know what? Devin Bush is too far behind as a higher draft pick. So like sometimes you just got to hit gold, straight gold with like a third or fourth round draft pick that's making, mid six figures or whatever, as opposed to a few million a year as a higher draft pick, or else that kind of idea still doesn't work and fit into the whole cap thing. But I just thought it was funny that the figures were off by like $10 million. And then they also said not only to re-sign Bud Dupree, as part of, so it was cut Mark Barron, Anthony Chickillo, Vance McDonald. It adds $21.3 million in cap space. That's still wrong. Maybe over the life of their contracts, but not for 2020 alone. Re-sign Bud Dupree. Okay. Sign Danny Amendola and Derek Wolfe and Tyler Eifert. And then draft a cornerback with their second-round pick. This is clearly somebody that has no clue or concept of the Steelers. Number one, I don't know why they would need Danny Amendola. They get 3 solid wide receivers already. We'll probably jump around the depth charts as far as whatever the priorities are. But Derek Wolfe is a 3-4 defensive end. They already have Stephon Tuitt and Cam Hayward as two of the highest earners on the team. You're going to throw $10 million, $11 $7 million at this guy. He's age 29. He's still pretty much in his prime. I don't even know that the Broncos let him go, to be honest. But you know what? They're messing with things. They're kind of rebuilding or restructuring their roster. So who knows? Tyler Eifert. Hey, here you go. And Labs mentions this too. I think he's missed 22 games in 3 seasons, where Vance has only missed 9. I think Vance only missed like 1.5 games or maybe 2 games total last season. So calling him injury prone was kind of like, it's not factually correct. I understand he missed some significant time or he got dinged up in the preseason or whatever, but actual regular season time, nah. You know what? He's not as injury prone as people are trying to make it out to be. And if it weren't for the poor quarterback play, which is what we also point at with the running game, they had to use tight ends to block more often, and it wasn't like they were getting open for passes or anything like that with quarterbacks who are holding on to the ball or getting pressured off it. So yeah, Vance played in 14 games this year. He played in 15 the year before. Okay, he missed 6 games in 2017. We're now going to be 3 seasons removed from that. Get over it, folks. Tyler Eifert is definitely not an answer, or some of these other guys at tight end, and magically creating some of these scenarios and bringing guys in. Steelers don't generally do that to begin with. I don't think they create a whole lot of holes. The only thing that you're going to see is you're going to see some type of things done, because Bud Dupree is definitely the guy they're not going to want to let go, unless you're one of the guys on Facebook that says, well, they could just let him walk. He only had 1 good year. Forget that he was injured. Forget he changed size. Forget he was in a rotation. Forget he drops into coverage. What was it? The top 10 of the edge rushers that we profiled the one time drops into coverage more than anybody else. This year, not as much. That's why he got the sacks. They actually just let him rush the quarterback. That's why his numbers went up. Otherwise, he wasn't even rushing at the quarterback enough. Forget all that. Tuzar Skipper, a guy who, couldn't make the Steelers roster, couldn't make the Giants, and was cut. That's the guy that's going to go in and be the starter. Okay, yeah. I got some beachfront property in Death Valley for you too that I'm going to sell.
Yeah, look, Bud has been on a steady progression upwards. And he's, the thing about guys like Bud, when you get them at where they got him, which was a pretty high draft pick, but he was always projected to be a project. He was never a guy that you said the raw talent that he has and the refined skills that he has are going to make make him a day one All-Pro. Nobody ever thought that. Everybody knew it was going to take time to develop this guy. And, he was hampered a little bit by injury at times, but for a lot of the cases, essentially, he's been on a steady progression, and it started to pay off not just in 2019, but in 2018 he had a better year. 2019 he broke out. To call him a one-year wonder, that's an unfair statement because you've seen the consistent growth. Maybe the best thing they can do is tag him and make it another 1-year contract year for him. But we'll have to see. I think, this is a situation where you really, really want to try and find a way to lock him up and to essentially get him, as a part of this defense long-term the best you can. Because as we've talked about in the past, you've got TJ's deal is going to come up. Minka's deal is going to come up. You got a lot of big money that's going to come up, and it's all going to be on that defensive side of the ball. And you better figure out where you're going to find that money because you want to keep this defense together as long as you can, and you certainly cannot afford to let the bookends on that line of TJ and Bud get away if you can help it.
Well, it's not only that, but, you look at some of the other seasons or some of the other guys that have come along. I understand Vic Beasley had 15.5 sacks in 2016. Since then, he's had seasons of 5, and then 8. These are the guys that came out of the same draft class. What has Shane Ray ever done? And it takes time. I'm not necessarily going to, rule these guys out. It took a while for James Harrison to even stick to a roster. Maybe Tuzar Skipper has that in him. Who knows? I don't know that. A lot of people, I think people, they get an idea in their head. They see somebody like LaMarr Woodley come right on the field, or even TJ Watt for that matter, and be almost an instant success. It doesn't always work like that, and especially with some of these edge rushers, it doesn't always work like that. It takes some time for these guys to develop. Even Michael Strahan took several years to really develop. There's, some of the all-time greats, and they're in the Hall of Fame for a reason, are the exceptions to the rule, like a Reggie White or a Kevin Green or somebody of that nature. So, and then other guys, like I just said, Strahan takes some time. I think Joey Porter.
You're right.
Joey Porter. Hold on one second. I think Joey Porter is another exception to that rule.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I just wanted to add a quote about that because it does. It takes some time. Little girl, you're in the middle of the ride, but everything's going to be all right.
All righty. And with that, folks, my name's Joe. His name's Brian. So, yeah, but you know what I mean? If you're feeling leery on Bud Dupree, I think what ends up happening, this could be a similar scenario to what they ended up doing with Lamar Woodley, to be frank, is if they don't get a deal done right away, rather than expose him to free agency, he gets tagged. That gets changed into an extension, kick some of that money forward. They do have some big deals. It does worry me. They do got some deals that they're going to have to do. The Minka one doesn't bother me as much because, to be completely honest with you, I think Ben Roethlisberger's off the books and possibly retired by then, and maybe they're rolling with a younger or cheaper veteran quarterback that helps make his contract more palatable at that time. And that's part of the thing that was the magic. It isn't the same CBA, but similar with when you had Ben and you had that window of Super Bowls, it's cheap quarterbacks, man. Russell Wilson was the same thing with the Legion of Boom, cheap quarterbacks that are on their rookie deals. So, this is some of the things where you have that window of opportunity. I'm going to say that with the Ravens. Lamar Jackson, you got this window of opportunity where you got a guy on his rookie deal. As soon as you're going to have to start paying him $30 million, you got to start cutting from other spots, and that does weaken other parts of your roster. But then you have your franchise quarterback in place too, so it's a catch-22. If you get to straight gold at the same time, and a quarterback is good under their rookie deal, and it helps support you being able to spend money elsewhere on your roster, that's pretty much been a lot of these recent Super Bowl teams that look at the Eagles. It was Carson Wentz. Nick Foles wasn't making too much as a backup to him. So, that's another prime example right there too. And I'm sure there's some more that just aren't popping into my head at the very moment, but or you get another guy that's under like a rookie contract. Well, I think Von Miller may have been under a rookie contract when the Broncos and Peyton Manning were doing their stuff too. And then he, reset the market with that huge deal, a colossal deal that he signed, 100-some million or whatever. Those are the type of things that end up happening, and it's a give and take. So I don't get upset about Ben tying up cap space. I don't get bent out of shape. I have the same concerns. Okay, you pay Bud. What if he doesn't put up the same numbers? There's no reason to believe that his arrow isn't still pointing up. They had a tremendous year. I don't think you excavate some of this defense and change anything, especially at his spot. If you got to let somebody like Mike Hilton walk, I think you have Justin Lane and Cam Sutton that are, waiting in the wings maybe that could fill in. We're talking about a nickel corner. I understand they play a lot of nickel, but it's a nickel corner. It's your third cornerback. And I think Hilton brings a dynamic to this team that is very important, but depending on what price tag comes along with that, so I kind of put him almost as a second priority, Brian. Javon Hargrave, about good as gone. As much as I would love to bring him back, this perfect offseason graphic I saw, I don't even know where it was from, and I'll protect the guilty and not mention it if I do find out. Why would you sign Derek Wolfe? I would bring Javon Hargrave back for what it's going to cost. Man, that's just it's nonsense. So, but I think he's going to fetch a rather large contract with a team that could pay him. Maybe not a good team, but a team that will give him an opportunity at a starter role and to set him up for life.
Yeah, I think. Look, his window of opportunity is now. He has. Certainly played his way into a big money contract, and the Steelers simply aren't going to be able to give it to him. As sad as that makes me, because I think, you're talking about a young man who, again, has a huge upside to go along with his huge backside. But, he's got so much added potential. We were so excited when they drafted him.
Oh, yeah.
For that very reason, that he has such get off and such quicks off of the snap. and just blows guys away and can make those kind of moves consistently, I think somebody's going to be real lucky, and we're going to be sorry. Well, we're going to be sorry that he goes, but there's just no way to keep him. Again, I think that Steelers would love to keep Javon Hargrave, but I don't think they know how they can possibly manage that, considering the cap space that they have, considering how much he plays, and considering how much he's likely to get paid. So yeah, I think that's unfortunately a done deal, and more than likely a getaway. I can't remember, is Hilton still a restricted free agent again?
Yeah, I believe I believe last year he was exclusive rights, and this year he's an RFA. So it's kind of like, if you remember I know you remember, but other folks, with the Emmanuel Sanders deal, somebody can make an offer like the Patriots did. The Steelers can match. If they end up letting that go, they get some type of compensation out of that, I believe, some type of draft pick. So, or right of refusal. It all depends. And I got to look it back
depending on the level of the proffer. Right.
Yeah, and you know what? And now that I'm thinking about it, being an undrafted player coming into the league, he probably doesn't have that tied to him like a draft pick sort of situation. So I got to look at that again. It's mush right now, honestly. So I don't want to put any misinformation out there, other than I know he's restricted. I believe Matt Filer and Zach Banner are the other two that are also the RFAs. And then the rest of the folks like BJ Finney, Javon Hargrave, Bud Dupree, they're all unrestricted. They're free to go wherever with, the Steelers. They could always be nice guys and say, hey, somebody offered me this deal. What can you do for me? But they're under no obligation by contract terms, by league rules, to do so.
Absolutely, yeah. Just because doesn't mean you can. I think, it's unfortunate because there are guys that you want to keep in the fold right now that are probably going to have to move on. But that's just the case every single year, and especially as time wears on and some of these guys start to show their capabilities, start to realize the promise that was originally seen in them, that for the reasons that they made the team. The bottom line is you can't pay everybody. You just can't. That's the way the situation is set up, so that you don't have teams that can just buy their way into a Super Bowl. You cannot pay everybody. And so, the Steelers have done a great job and continue to do a good job of trying to grow their talent internally and not spend the money unnecessarily or frivolously in free agency, and just try and keep their guys around. But I can't say it enough. You can't keep everybody.
Yeah, I was trying to look this up real quick in between this. So it's, compensation required, depends on the rounds, depends on the original status, things of that nature. So it's something where I believe, the Steelers would tender, and then there's, teams have they can match the offer sheets. You can make trades, things of that nature. So, go Google it because I don't want to get into the whole, we could do that on another episode. Really what I need to do is we need to hammer out, what is the priorities here? Because you briefly mentioned and came to a conclusion that we were going to come to, but we need to put some logic and reasoning behind it. I'm going to look at this defense since we're on defense. I look at the defensive line. You lose Javon Hargrave, okay? You're going to get Tuitt back healthy. He tore a pec, Cam Hayward tore a pec, and then Cam Hayward became like an all-pro. So Tuitt could still be there. So I got in an argument with somebody that was like, Tuitt's not worth the money he's being paid either. And I was like, do you realize how young this guy is? And, he's got a lot of upside. He was playing like a man possessed before he got hurt. I know the best ability is availability, but this is unlucky. You know what I mean? This stuff happens. We didn't throw or discard Cam Hayward for the same reason. We're not going to do this with Stephon Tuitt. Not to mention that the cap hit, and I don't even think you get the savings. I think it's in the negative as far as the savings. You lose money if he's not on the roster, so there's no reason to move on. Tyson Alualu, he's still there. He's a veteran. He's a good guy that could come in and give everyone a breather. Hargrave, really made waves. Subbing or filling in for Tuitt. Steelers don't play a lot of nose tackle. We've mentioned this before. That's not their 3-4, although it's still considered, their base. It's not really. It's kind of like this nickel, and it's even like a hybrid where you just have two of the defensive tackles or defensive ends on the field, and nobody kind of, over center in a lot of these formations. So in that aspect, if you're going to squeeze out, 15, 20 snaps, I think you could do that with Alualu's done it before, but you still have Big Dan McCullers. You have Isaiah Buggs, who's kind of a project player. They could draft somebody. I don't know that it's a top priority. Looking at replacements otherwise, if you keep Mark Barron, great. If you don't, they still have some guys backing up here where, they may feel comfortable with Ulysses Gilbert, who was just drafted. And, you're really talking about linebacker 3, maybe linebacker 4. It all depends. I know the professor likes Robert Spillane, who was a practice squad guy who got called up to the main roster. You still have Ola. You still have Cesar Skipper if they move on from Anthony Chickalo as, expected. But I don't feel comfortable with either of those guys going into Bud's spot. So when you look at that front 7, really that makes Dupree the priority. When you look at the defensive backfield, Joe Hayden, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Terrell Edmonds, Steven Nelson, potentially Mike Hilton. We already mentioned that he could have some replacements. Artie Burns is on his way out. There's replacements for him. He's not a starter. You don't need to get Jimmy Ward or Josh Norman to replace or be a third corner and pay them a lot of money. Terrell Edmonds is going to be here. He's on a rookie contract. There's some growing pains maybe with him, but it's also the way he plays. I mean, he leads the team in tackles. It's pretty much, don't get beat on the deep ball. And if you look at the plays that were given up, those plays are going to happen because it's pro football. You're playing other pros. I'm not so down on him. I know the PFF grades are down on him, but again, some folks are out there, hey, just roll with Sean Davis. Not under contract. Free agent. Unrestricted free agent. Can't do that. So defensively, this is why everybody thinks offense. I think they think offense because they think the offense was terrible. Why was the offense terrible, Brian? They didn't have Ben Roethlisberger. Who did they get
Absolutely.
back? Ben Roethlisberger. Who might be able to be okay if Ben Roethlisberger's not bad? Maybe Mason Rudolph. Maybe Duck Hodges or Paxton Lynch provide some role there. We did this on the last episode. Won't cover quarterback again. Don't think that they're going to draft one. They've come out and said they're not going to sign one. Quarterback, not happening. They got enough money. They got enough investments tied up in that position. And there's still JT Barrett, too, who's going to come to camp maybe as well. As quarterback, I don't know. Or if I don't know what the deal is, or if he's just going to be, maybe they'll be working on some things because within their division, they got to worry about mobile quarterbacks, Wide receiver. You've got Juju. He's a year removed from being in the Pro Bowl when he had his future Hall of Fame quarterback in there. I'm not down on this guy whatsoever. I don't think he plays too much video games. I don't think he's full of nonsense. I was at camp. He's definitely business. He's all business. He looked like he was going to be fantastic. Like he was going to take the next step. Quarterback play hindered that a lot last season, and he was hampered with injuries as well, probably playing hurt too. So you got to keep that in mind. James Washington and Deontay Johnson both flashed. Everyone was like, hey, who's going to replace Antonio Brown? Well, here you go. These guys were jumping in there. A young man that could run really fast, Deion Kane. A little bit, according to this group, maybe an older man, Johnny Holton, who's been around the block, a journeyman kind of guy, a veteran, also could run really fast in a straight line. I think they always look at wide receivers, but I don't know that they're going to go in free agency with their limited capital and go just grab a guy unless the price is right. It would have to be like Justin Hunter level, Darius Hayward-Bay level. So that's not a top priority for me. You know where we're headed. No, not running back either. You still got James Conner for another year. And, okay, he gets hurt. You got Benny Snell, who may take the leap in year 2, okay? I think they're comfortable with that. Kareth White got some playing time last year. I think they like him, too. Jalen Samuels is still a utility guy. He's almost like a Mewelde Moore type role, third down back who could run in some spots but is absolutely terrific at, getting the ball in space, catching the football, and he scores touchdowns. That's what he does. I don't think you're bumping any of these guys. Maybe a draft pick they really like falls somewhere. It's best player available, but I don't think they're going out there. They're not even going to sign like a Stephen Ridley type guy, let alone a D'Angelo Williams type guy. That means no Melvin Gordon, no Derrick Henry, whoever the heck else is out there floating around in free agency. They can't afford it, and this isn't the year I think to pull the trigger on that just yet. You're a year removed from James Conner being a Pro Bowl guy too, and who's to say a healthy James Conner isn't going to play 16 games. This used to be the knock on Le'Veon Bell, remember? So that leaves us with 2 offensive categories here, Brian. It's tight end and offensive line. Well, let's cut Vance McDonald and get some cap space. Well, okay, that leaves you with Zach Gentry, Christian Scotland Williamson, and I don't know, who else? Kevin Rader? Those are going to be your tight ends unless they draft somebody or sign somebody else. And for the savings, you're not going to get anybody much better than Vance McDonald to jump in there unless they really roll with Vannett as the starter and think Gentry can make a year too leap. But they would have to re-sign Vannett, and I think that eats up all the savings of Vance McDonald. I think you kind of swallow that pill. We still like tight end. It would be nice and fancy and a shiny toy to add to the arsenal. I think it helps the offense. But all indications are pointing at what position? Brian, you spilled the beans earlier.
Offensive line.
Yes. Why is that?
Well, the reason for that is that you've got some age on your offensive line. They're still quality. They're still good, but you're going to lose your primary backups in guys like B.J. Finney and whatnot. You need to restock the well, all right? And that's going to have to start at a time when you can afford to spend those picks in that area. They're not the sexy picks except for me and Zach. We're the only ones who think they're sexy. But you get to a point where you've got Pouncey is on the tail end of his career. DeCastro is getting older. Ramon Foster is older. Alejandro Villanueva is an older guy. He began his career as an older guy. You've got age on that offensive line, and there will come a time where that simply falls off. And you have to have made some plans to bring in some new guys. And yes, you got Chooks here, you've got Banner, you've got Filer, you've got guys who can probably start to fill those gaps. But again, you've got to now start to get that second set of backups, the guys who are going to come in and fill those positions if somebody on the starting rotation can't go. It's just the right time to try and do it if the right individuals are there. I'm kind of with you in the sense that for me it's BPA all day, which is why it will be JK all day, because JK will be there amazing. And it will be JK all day. Damn it! And look, guys, you're not going to talk me out of it. That's who I want. And if he's gone already, then I'll shut up. But until he's not there when they pick, that's the guy I want. But I'll be happy if they go offensive line.
Well, yeah, and it won't be the most exciting thing, but I remember, they went the beginning of last decade, and they went to the well, man. This was, let me see here. I'm pulling them all up. I know I'm off the top of my head. I want to get the years right, though. 2010 was Marquise Pouncey. 2011, second rounder was Marcus Gilbert. First rounder in 2012 was David DeCastro. Second rounder, they double dipped with Mike Adams. And then they also went out and got Kelvin Beachum, who became a starter and then ended up leaving and making a lot of money elsewhere.
Yep.
As a seventh round pick. That's 3 years in a row where they went offensive line, very heavy on offensive line. They brought in some guys. Wesley Johnson was brought in, couldn't make the roster, and has had a decent NFL career with other teams from the 2014 draft. They really haven't gone, and they've gotten a lot of mileage for many years off of gentlemen who've been late round picks or undrafted. You look at Ramon Foster, undrafted. You look at Alejandro Villanueva, undrafted. You look at Matt Filer, undrafted. I don't know how much more they can continue to do something like that as, these guys like Pouncey and David DeCastro, they're approaching their 30s or, just hitting their 30s. This is something that they might have to start thinking about. I don't know if you're drafting an immediate starter right away. I mean, it's a possibility. I don't know. Like you said, I don't know what they think. There was somebody that already said this too. Well, Core 4 is ready to play. Just throw him in there, move Filer over to guard for Ramon Foster. I think it's also kind of interesting that Filer plays tackle and they didn't keep him as a guard. Was that out of necessity? Did he shine better there like Chris Hubbard did with some games? And if you got a guy that's a converted guard and he's holding down the tackle spot, and I know he's done well, but what does that say about the other guys that are on the roster? Maybe they're not ready yet. You know what I mean? So you can't just assume that a Core 4 is going to leap into starter role status, or even Zach Banner for that matter. They could very well, and in Banner's case, he very much fits the same kind of mold of Foster or Villanueva. Here's a guy that was plucked from released by somebody else, brought in. They got him in really good shape. What did he lose, like 60 pounds? And he's popular. Everybody, he's the eligible receiver. This is. But he's also a restricted free agent too. I think they got to look at some. They're going to be looking at some at least one offensive linemen. And I think if you get a draft that's very top heavy here, if people all of a sudden get like crazy over quarterbacks in this draft, that could be really good for the Steelers who don't have a first round draft pick, which, that's how they landed DeCastro the one year. It was, everybody overlooked him. He should have been a top 10 pick. And rightfully so. You see what he's done. I'm not going to say that somebody like that's going to fall into the second round, but you could have some prospects. You could get, Le'Veon Bell was a second rounder. Juju Smith-Schuster fell into the second round. Stephon Tuitt fell into the second round. The Steelers have a good track record with second round picks. That happens to be their first overall pick in this upcoming draft. And, I still think maybe a best player available. We were talking about tight ends. Draft Twitter and all this, getting real excited about some guys. A lot of guys that are from like small colleges, maybe unproven, don't have a lot of games, maybe even against greater competition. I know we like Thaddeus Moss. We've talked about him, coming out of LSU. Go back and look. Yep. What's he played? Like 14 games in college with LSU, if that. And, he's only had a couple of real big games. I mean, he's going to be raw. He's not going to jump in there and start right away if you cut Vance McDonald. That's going to be a problem. That's a learning curve in the NFL. So, and I don't think that this, my cursory knowledge of the draft so far just tells me that tight end group or class is kind of weaker this year. And that means some of the bigger names that are somewhat big names, I guess you would say, or the top of their class. There may be teams that aren't willing to risk using a higher pick, and those guys are going to fall into the middle rounds. It's just going to be one of those things, and the Steelers happen to have a lot of, I'm not going to say a lot of picks, but some middle round picks to play with to do something like that. So when I look at offensive line, I look at like BJ Finney leaving, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, who's the potential next guard? Ramon Foster has one more year left, and people are like, oh yeah, you could cut him. Even if you do that, you move Filer over, you move Okorafor and a tackle. You got to bring back Banner, you got to bring back Filer, now you don't have any backups, really. You're going to need an extra tackle. You're going to need a guard. You're going to need a center. So it may behoove them to look at an offensive lineman, and particularly all these guys that usually come out of college are going to be versatile. I don't know that they need a specialist, so to speak, but if they picked up like a right tackle, or heck, if they were able – I know Marcus Gilbert hadn't been healthy, but if he comes in – cheaply and is interested in playing for the Steelers and doing this is the other thing. I got to bring this up real quick, Brian. I know I'm long-winded, but not every NFL player is taking the quote home team discount and playing cheaply for another team. It's just not going to happen. And there is risk with bringing somebody like Gilbert. That's the only reason why I would suggest that he may be able to come in at a lower cost and maybe a one-year deal. But does he prohibit coming back? Does he strengthen the line, or does he prohibit some of these younger guys from getting experience and maybe ascending to a role like he used to have with the team, where we used to think, hey, here's a guy that's Pro Bowl quality talent that isn't getting the recognition and honor that he deserves. But, at the same time, if he's not playing up to that level again, that could be an entire waste of investment in time and planning for the future of, what goes on with this offensive line over the next 2-3 seasons, particularly protecting Big Ben Roethlisberger and or his successor.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about whether you're going to pull in a veteran guy. I think the thing about this group is that's what they have. They have basically got veteran guys. What they need is some juice. They need some youth, which is why I think it's less likely that they try and sign a free agent offensive lineman, as opposed to just focus on it in the draft. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And the guys that you mentioned, a guy like Gilbert, there's familiarity with the team. They know him. He knows them. It's possible. It's just unlikely in my view. And you talked also about tight ends. I want to say something about the tight end class. Look, you need to go back, and everybody needs to slow their roll on tight end and how they're going to come in and make a splash. Go back over the last 4 years of drafts and look at the top tight ends taken and find me one, just one, who has come in and lit the world on fire. It doesn't happen.
Well, don't you know Hunter Henry, man? I mean, he's had 2 serious injuries, missed like 30 games, and the Steelers are just going to sign him because the Chargers are going to let him walk, and he's going to be peanuts too.
Yeah, even the guys that the 700 tight ends that the Ravens have picked, even those guys took time to develop into that offense, and that's the thing.
Has Hayden Hurst developed?
No.
Okay.
I said some of you. What's the other guy? Mark Andrews had.
Mark Andrews has, yeah, monster.
But again, it wasn't a blowout, the light up the night kind of a season. He had a decent season. The problem is most of these tight ends are a little light, as Craig Wolfley might say, a little light in the caboose. Their blocking is suspect. They're either great receivers or they're great blockers. So you're either getting half of the tight end you want regardless, and they have to grow into those positions. Look, I know our boy, Eric has a man crush on Adam Troutman. It's out. No. Just no.
I mean, it's University of Dayton, which, I've become more familiar with, being in that area.
My hometown, man.
Yeah,
it's my hometown.
Over the last year, being around the area. And, it's Steelers Nation strong out in Dayton, too, Dayton, Ohio, for people who aren't aware. But, it's University of Dayton. It's FCS, and it's like everybody shares highlight clips. He's one of many examples. There's some other guys that are there. I don't know that this is necessarily the draft that they the only reason I think they would go after a tight end is if they have an obvious hole on the roster, and that would be not bringing back Fournette or if they get rid of McDonald. I think it's a real gamble, and I don't know that there's anybody in free agency here. That's what I was trying to look up, like anybody that's even
let me finish my thought here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is the Thaddeus Moss. The thing about Moss is, even though he's got limited experience and limited exposure at LSU, that's a Steelers tight end. All right, because he's not he hasn't shown you the dramatic receiving capabilities, but Zach and I've talked about this several times. The professor, he's a guy. He does a lot of stuff good. He doesn't really do anything at an elite level, but he's the kind of guy they can mold into a Heath Miller type tight end. If that's not sacrilegious to say. But, the problem with Moss is, of course, the name recognition, being Randy Moss's son. That name recognition, may get him overdrafted, from where he should be. Zach and I are, I think, in agreement. If Thaddeus Moss is there in the third round with whatever compensatory pick they have, hey, look, I said the word right this time. With whatever pick that is, and they want to take a stab at him, I got no issues with that. Taking a guy like Adam Troutman in the second round with the 49th or 50th pick, whatever it is, that's just insanity. They're never going to do that.
Well, I mean, just looking at this class, too, for free agents where they don't have money. Greg Olson's 35 years old. I don't see that happening. He just made $8.5 million adjusted average, last season. This comes from Spot Track as well, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's still bigger money than the Steelers, I think, would be willing to spend. Eric Ebron's making the same amount of money as Vance McDonald. You can't tell me you would rather have him over Vance McDonald. Not going to happen. Vernon Davis retired. Jason Witten could retire. Tyler Eifert should retire. Demetrius Harris was just let go by the Browns. And then you have Mercedes Lewis, Charles Clay, Hunter Henry. He'll probably get tagged, I would think. Darren Fells, Darren Fells had an okay season and kind of came from out of wherever. But Lance Kendrick, Logan Thomas, Levine To'olo, Luke Wilson. Come on, folks. Some of these guys that are, gonna hit the market. I think there's just a glut or a bottleneck of just, I don't want to say mediocre, but maybe just average tight ends that are, chilling here that could become unrestricted free agents when we get to the end of March. I'm not saying the tight end isn't a priority or isn't something the Steelers should look at, because looking down the road, it wouldn't hurt to put somebody, stash them away, let them get, 20, 30 snaps a game, grow, kind of like the way Jesse James did, and have him there and potentially rise into a starter status should they take an option on McDonald in the future. Let's just say the worst case scenario, McDonald plays 12 games or sick and tired of him being injured. Ben comes back and he just doesn't end up being any kind of the weapon that they, that he's flashed to be. And then, okay, next year you move on. But there's no reason, I think, to do that just now. We don't even know what they like Vanette, but we have no idea what that's going to be. And it's not like the Steelers to not make sure they have a veteran player in place when they concentrate on filling a hole that they may have in the draft. So they usually double dip. They'll usually have somebody that's a veteran, even if it's a low-priced guy in free agency, and somebody that they draft. And they can really go anywhere with this, I believe. They could go grab a linebacker. They could grab anybody, maybe a safety. We don't talk enough about safety. I think everybody thinks, oh, well, this person's just going to jump in and replace Terrell Edmonds. No, not going to happen. It's not the bum you think he is. Sorry, but should he or Minka get hurt, they'd be in real trouble. They need somebody in a backup role, and I think what they have there now is proven to not be capable of that. They're special teams players or whatever. Maybe give somebody a breather, which usually never happens in the secondary with Mike Tomlin's teams over the years. So, these are the kind of things we're looking at. But definitely, Brian, I think we've hammered out the offseason priorities. Re-sign Bud Dupree, find an offensive lineman, somebody that you could groom, or I don't know that they'll jump in right away. Maybe they could, depending on what position they play and what the need is there. So, but again, I think they do something. I think Ramon Foster still hangs around for a year, because why not? What would be the best case scenario? The new guy doesn't have to jump in right away, or you don't have to move Matt Filer over from the position he's been playing for a year and a half or whatnot. So I think those are all good situations for the Steelers. They could surprise us and do what you want and do J.K. Dobbins out of Ohio State, which, he's a dynamic player. He would definitely give me the fuzzies, warm and fuzzies that Le'Veon Bell did. I mean, it's an upgrade over what they would have now. I don't think it's admitting a mistake or saying any of the other guys wouldn't be capable, but I don't think it's something where they necessarily have to go and reach, and it isn't a need, and I don't think they have very many needs. And as we get into free agency, we will see with who they end up retaining versus who ends up leaving, and then that gives us a good idea where their draft plans are going to be too.
Yeah, I love the idea of drafting JK because of allowing him to be in place for not this year so much to speak, but for the following year when Connor's rookie deal is up and it's time to make what will end up being a difficult choice, but one that unless he, absolutely turns it completely around, doesn't have any injury issues and performs tremendously this season, will probably be easy for them to make. And you've got the next guy there. And ready to go. So it's about addressing a need before it becomes a need. But there's ample reason to think an inside offensive lineman or a tackle, it could be that first pick.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people will be like, "Well, they needed to get a quarterback." No, come on.
No, they don't.
There's areas they're much stronger in. I think, to be completely honest, too, even if they do retain what they have at offensive line, one injury could be very catastrophic to the whole plans there, and that hurts the entire offense overall. So I do think if you have a strong candidate there, go for it. A tight end wouldn't necessarily be the worst case scenario, depending on how that shakes out, who's there come around draft time. But I'm holding out hope that they not only keep McDonald, but they're able to somehow work something with Vanette. Sounds like he enjoyed being here, but you're coming off that rookie contract. You're probably looking to get paid. I don't know how much he would get paid, but we saw Jesse James make an insane amount of money, and he didn't do much of anything up for the Detroit Lions. And you know what? There's another guy there, same way with the Le'Veon Bell thing, and that's something they could be keeping their eye on in a year down the road. These are guys that probably won't, because of their current contracts and dead cap space, if they were cut from their current rosters, from their current organization. I don't think that those teams are going to pull the trigger on that kind of move in 2020, but 2021... it's a lot more palatable to them. They may become available, and the Steelers know that too. So don't freak out if they don't go grab a running back or a tight end, because they're keeping their eye on that and thinking, well, we could bring one of those guys back. Or it's not even those guys. It's the guys that we're not even thinking about, like somebody that they scouted, like Steven Nelson, and they know he's going to maybe hit free agency in a year. And, hey, you know what? We could hold down the fort with what we have here and then we could address that need next year. Maybe we have more money to do so, and that's something you always got to keep into consideration. They're doing that with the draft classes too. They know the guys that are going to be coming out the following year also, and that all plays into it. I know everybody does what these teams need and the draft Twitter thing, but you know what? It's a lot more complex than that, and since we're not in those rooms and in those discussions, all we can do is speculate, and that's where I'm speculating that, you know what, it's Bud and probably offensive line, maybe tight end, definitely going to grab a receiver at some point. Focus on offense. Yeah, probably because they focus so much on defense over the years, and now that the defense is up to snuff, there isn't a whole lot that they need to do there unless they don't bring somebody like Bud back. Then that becomes alarming, and then you're going to have to reach and do something maybe in the draft, maybe grab a lower quality free agent or something like that, or hope one of your other guys that are there can play up to a certain quality that doesn't harm your defense, doesn't bring your level down there. Kind of like when they lost Shazier is what I'm thinking, and I don't think the Steelers will do that.
I agree. I agree completely.
Yep. Well, Brian, thanks for joining me once again, my friend. And it's always good when we agree, when we see eye to eye. So
yes.
We'll actually have some I think we're going to have something exciting coming later this week, so stay tuned for that, of course. And until next time, my name is Joe, his name's Brian, and as always, we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.